Hey there everyone, this is Samuel Johnson and welcome back to the Steven Universe Retrospectives. And today we're going to be discussing episodes 133 and 134 of Steven Universe, Raising the Barn and Back to the Kindergarten. And just like with last week's episodes, these episodes kind of deal with the fallout from the previous storyline. If you need a reminder, what had happened was that Steven had turned himself over to the homeworld to save his friends and family, and as a result he wound up being put on trial by the Diamonds and, well, almost was found guilty. However, thanks to the help of his Zircon lawyer and some quick thinking, Steven was able to escape the Diamonds, and after a quick death and resurrection on Lars's part, Steven managed to find a getaway back home via a gateway in his hair that connected to the lion's mane. Unfortunately, when Steven returned home, things were not exactly good back. While everybody was happy to see him again, sadly, Steven's decisions caused a bit of a rift between him and Connie, as she felt that he really never considered her at all when he made his decision, and so as a result, she's kind of keeping some distance between them. And sadly, with the instant Steven realizes just how badly he screwed things up, Connie's not talking with him. And so no matter how many times he calls or texts her, she does not respond, so Steven has just been left in the dark, wondering when she'll ever get back to him, which is where Raising the Barn kicks up, as it's been a while since our last episode, and Steven is still down in the dumps, although he has stopped himself from constantly berating Connie with texts and calls because, well, he wants to give her space, since last episode, Steven kind of came to realize that maybe this is just Connie's way of dealing with everything. As such, Steven, to try and get his mind off things, ends up taking his guitar and goes onto the beach with the intent of playing a song. Before he even gets the chance, his phone rings. At first, Steven thinks it might be Connie who's ready to talk, but it turns out it's actually from Peridot. As such, Steven does answer, and sure enough, on the other end is Peridot and Lapis, who did hear that Steven was back from his trip to space, and just kind of want all the details about it. As such, Steven kind of gives them a very quick summary of what had happened, how he was brought to Homeworld, how he was put on trial, and even how he was brought before the Diamonds. And that detail gets Lapis's attention something fierce, as she immediately starts asking Steven for details about how he actually was face to face with the Diamonds and how he ran from the Diamonds. And Steven says, "Oh no, yeah, it's fine. No, I got away from them. It's all good." But Lapis actually starts freaking out to the point where she kind of shows Peridot out of the shot because they're doing it like face cam. And when she learns that Steven ran away, she just immediately ends the call with the last thing we hear her saying, Peridot, we need to get off world. And yeah, that doesn't exactly bode well for Steven. As such, he immediately goes over to the barn to see what's going on, and we see Lapis and Peridot kind of getting into a bit of a tiff. And the reason for that tiff? Well, as Lapis said, she wants to get off planet, and the reason for that is because she believes that with all the grievances that Steven has accrued with the Diamonds, well, they're gonna get angry. And when they get angry, they're gonna come to Earth to take their anger out on it and every living thing on here, which will include the crystal gems. And the thing with Lapis, she doesn't want to be there when that happens, mostly due to her PTSD from the previous gem war. So basically, she wants to get while the getting's good. And, well, when Steven arrives on the scene, he's actually kind of shocked by this. And part of the reason why Lapis and Peridot are having their tiff is because Peridot keeps trying to list reasons why they shouldn't go. And it all really has to do with their stuff. Like, what about our crops? Lapis says they can just deal. Well, what about our rewatch of Cat Pining Hearts? We can just take the DVD with us. We can't watch it without the TV. We'll bring the TV with us. And so on and so forth. Basically, Peridot keeps throwing out excuse after excuse for why they can't leave Earth, but Lapis has an answer to every one, and put simply, she's not taking no for an answer. She wants off-world, and she wants to do it before the big bads show up, and she's gonna do whatever it takes to make that possible. As such, Steven hears this, and while he's not okay with it, and even tries assuring Lapis that it's fine, the Diamonds think he's on Homeworld, so they won't come finding him here, Lapis thinks that it's just only a matter of time, and like I said, due to her PTSD, she's not willing to risk being caught up in another war. So she really just wants to get out of here. And sadly, it doesn't matter what Peridot says, Lapis ain't listening. With Lapis even finding a solution for all Peridot's excuse about how, well, what about our meat morbs, or what about all our stuff and all that crap. And so Lapis' response? Just take the whole fucking barn. Like literally, she takes their underground pool and utilizing it, she actually creates a giant water dome that lifts the very foundation of the barn right out of the ground. So Lapis thinks that wherever they go in space, they can have all their stuff with them. So it's all good. I guess then maybe have to find a way to rig up electricity. But hey, it's all good. They're gems. They don't need to worry about space travel. It's all fine and dandy. You know. But yeah, it's clear though that even with this newfound solution, Peridot's not for this. She's obviously nervous, but it's clear she's clamming up. Steven, for the most part, is trying to be supportive. While he makes it clear he doesn't want Peridot and Lapis to go, he's also telling them that if they want to leave, he's not going to stop them. He'll miss them, but he understands why they're going. Before Lapis and Peridot can go, because Lapis wants to leave ASAP, Peridot notices something. They're missing Pumpkin. Yeah, the whole time Pumpkin's just kind of been cowering behind Peridot throughout her and Lapis's tiff, and unfortunately, as Lapis finally has come to the solution of just taking the damn barn, Pumpkin seems to have just straight up vanished, even though she was with Peridot. As such, with Pumpkin gone, Lapis kind of puts their departure on hold as she, Steven, and Peridot have to split up to try and find Pumpkin. As such, Lapis takes the air while Peridot and Steven cover the ground, and unfortunately, Peridot and Steven aren't really making much headway as they walk through the woods, only find a basketball, manage to find a produce stand, which is literally onions selling onions, which I find hilarious. But ultimately, it's clear. But ultimately, yeah, throughout the whole thing, you can tell that Peridot's a bit in denial, so to speak, about this whole thing. And like I said, she clearly doesn't want to leave, as she keeps thinking of excuses like, well, maybe it's a good thing we'll be in space. I can still help you guys. After all, we can communicate via the phone. But Steven tells her there's no Wi-Fi in space. She's like, well, maybe it's a good thing we're not communicating. After all, if the diamonds do show up, I probably don't want to know that you guys get killed. It's clear that Peridot is trying to find a silver lining on this, and it simply ain't working. And it gets to the point where, as the day goes on and the sun's about to go down, they can't seem to find Pumpkin, and they're getting exasperated. But when Steven and Peridot go back to the barn, they happen to find Pumpkin hiding in their cornfield. As such, Peridot manages to try and grab Pumpkin and pull her out, but Pumpkin does not want to go with her, and Peridot. I'm sorry, I'm getting Lapis and Peridot's names mixed up. Peridot just starts unloading on Pumpkin. Just pretty much just going, come on, you have to go, you have to go, you don't want... It's like, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you're being torn away from everything you want. This is for Lapis. We have no choice. We have to do this for her. So stop fighting it. And the end result, but ultimately, Pumpkin manages to slip out of Peridot's grip and actually goes cuddling over with Steven. And yeah, Steven finally puts two and two together and realizes, oh, you don't want to leave Peridot. And Peridot admits, yeah, she doesn't want to leave. She genuinely wants to stay, but but ultimately, this is what Lapis wants. And the thing is, throughout the episode, Peridot talked about how she tries to make Lapis comfortable at any possible opportunity. Kind of using Steven's latest space excursion as an example, Lapis was beyond worried about him, and Peridot had to, apparently, in her own words, bend over backwards just to keep Lapis content. And so the thing is, regardless of whether... And so pretty much this is just an extension of that, as Peridot believes that they need that, even if this is not something she wants, it's for Lapis's sake. So she has to do it, even if it means potentially doing something she doesn't want to do. Which, yes, even when Steven kind of realizes that, it's like, well, it's maybe something that she thinks she needs, but is it something that you need? And Steven finally encourages Peridot to talk to Lapis. And sure enough, no sooner does Steven say that Lapis shows up, seeing that they found Pumpkin, and thinks, okay, we can go now. And so she once again tries raising the barn, but with Steven kind of pushing her on, Peridot finally decides, okay, screw it, I need to talk to you. As such, Peridot finally just throws the gauntlet down, so to speak, and tells Lapis that maybe they shouldn't leave. And from there, they once again started getting into a little argument, with even Pumpkin cowering behind Steven. And Peridot talks about how there are some things she doesn't talk about because she doesn't want to upset Lapis. Lapis gets upset about that because she considers that lying. And then likewise, Peridot says, I wanted to tell you, and I thought now was a good I've been wanting to tell you this, and I just couldn't find the perfect time to do it. It's like, and you think now, just before we leave, is a good time, and Peridot says, no, it's not. And even Lapis, and of course Lapis asks why did you do that, which leads to the other thing. But point is, it comes down to Peridot telling Lapis they built a life on Earth. And ultimately, she thinks that this is all worth fighting. That she thinks that when the diamonds do show up, she doesn't want to run and hide from them. She wants to fight them, to face them, because she thinks that if it comes down to the crystal gems versus the diamonds, they'll win. And that, hell, if Lapis joins the fight, she'll win. And that ultimately, Earth is their home. They've built a life for themselves here. Isn't that worth fighting for? And Lapis's response is, I'm not getting caught in another war. At which point, she turns her back on Peridot and Steven, throws out her water wings, and pulls the barn right out of the ground again. And so, she flies to the sky, taking the barn with her. With the last look that she has towards Steven and Peridot being a sad glance. As you can tell, she's a little bit torn inside, but at the end of the day, her fears went out as she flies into the sky, taking her and Peridot's home with her. So yeah, things are not going so well for everybody. As such, the episode ends with Steven kind of reconciling Peridot and inviting her back to the temple, and well, she and Peridot and Pumpkin end up moving back into the bathroom. Only this time, Steven goes to try and make it more homey, setting up like a makeshift bed in the tub for Peridot, and which Peridot immediately just climbs into in just a bit of just sadness and depression. At which point, as she lies there groaning, Steven pulls out his phone. He sees that he has no missed calls, and the last line of the episode is Peridot asking Steven, "Well, now what do we do?" Yeah, overall, kind of a bummer ending. But this is where back to the kindergarten comes in, as this episode takes place at least some time after the events of raising the barn, as Peridot has stayed living with the crystal gems for in that entire time, as Steven's offer was pretty much that she can stay as long as she wants for as long as she needs to, and pretty much the entire time she's just been staying in the bathroom, which means that Steven can't do a lot of his morning routine stuff like washing his hair, brushing his teeth, or cleaning out his ears, and so on and so forth. So, he kind of has to make do by doing all that stuff in the kitchen. However, as Steven is going through this pseudo-morning routine, Amethyst comes out of the temple and sees him, and when she asks if Peridot is still in the bathroom, Amethyst thinks, okay, I think we need to get her out of there. She's been moping in there for days now. As such, they go into the bathroom, and we see that, yeah, Peridot's depression's kind of gotten worse, as she's playing sad music on her tablet. She's just kind of slumped over, like halfway out of the tub, with her face just scrunched up against the side of the tub, with her body still inside. And anytime that Amethyst and Steven try talking to her, she just responds with, and when they finally do manage to get a chance to see her face by flipping her onto her back, it's just like, with just her arms just frozen like this. It's clear that she's not doing well emotionally, and pretty much she's just not. And essentially, she's down in the dumps, and she's not getting out anytime soon. As such, Amethyst, to try and help Peridot out, asks her if she wants to, tells her that maybe they need to get out of the house for a bit, and Amethyst suggests maybe going back to the kindergarten, as she's been wanting to go back there for some time since she met all those amethysts at the human zoo, and she'd like to put faces to holes, so to speak. Plus, she thinks that Peridot would probably benefit from going to the kindergarten because, hey, it's Peridot. She's the smarty, and maybe she'll feel better if she makes Steven and Amethyst feel stupid for knowing things that they don't. So hey, it might help everybody out. And so Peridot, while still grumpy, does at least think, I do miss that. And so she does agree to go with Steven and Amethyst to the kindergarten. Though instead of warping there, they end up taking the train cars, and sadly the whole ride there, Peridot still just kind of roll up into a ball in the corner. As such, the trio end up arriving in the kindergarten, and in the beginning, it looks like that being there does help Peridot a little, as once Amethyst starts trying to put names to the holes, Peridot immediately corrects her and is even able to tell specific details about certain amethysts based on how their holes look. But unfortunately, this is not helping her at all, especially considering that, well, when she lived at the barn, she was a farmer. She made life from the earth, made something beautiful, made something perfect. And then compare that to the kindergarten, where life is literally stripped away, drained out, and all that's left is an empty husk. In her own words, she used to think the kindergarten was where life began. Now she knows this is where life ends. It's actually rather poetic. It's a nice way of showcasing how far her character development has come in that regard, but also as a way of showcasing just how bad her depression has gotten. As even here, she's just not reveling in what she does best in. She's just feeling down in the dumps. Even at one point doing kind of funny line how you say now it's like now there's no one. It's like all the resources have been taken by the amethysts, and now there are no more amethysts here. And amethyst just screams out, "Hey!" It's like, sorry, all the good well-made amethysts are gone. Amethyst's like, yo, not better. But I don't know, it's funny. I like that unintentional burn. But put simply, as Peridot just kind of laments everything, she talks about how this place can have no life, and as she wanders around, she keeps talking about it. Something catches her eye. A flower that's blooming in the kindergarten, which shocks everyone there. Of course, Peridot is a little dubious of it, but Amethyst and Steven look at this and think, hey, just another example of Earth bouncing back. That's all good. However, Peridot is clearly a bit suspicious of it, and in a bid to try and get her mind off of the recent events with Lapis, she decides that they need to experiment to see if the kindergarten truly can sustain other life. As such, Steven, and Amethyst decide to make a garden in the kindergarten. As they manage to go get some sunflowers, some fertilizer, some soil, some water, and begin just planting them all in the kindergarten to see how well they look and so forth. So this does manage to actually bring some zest back to Peridot and does kind of raise her mood quite a bit. So it does seem to be working wonders. And sure enough, they do manage to plant a whole batch of sunflowers, which admittedly do look pretty. But although of course it can't just put the sunflowers in and expect them to work overnight because, well, after all, they have to settle to the new surroundings. So after they plant them, the trio leave and decide to come back the next day. With the next day, everything seeming to go well as Peridot and Amethyst are discussing how the sunflowers are taken to their new environment, and Steven actually getting to use the fucking bathroom. But of course, Peridot is grateful for Steven and Amethyst for doing this with her, and she and them do take another train car back to the kindergarten, only to find the sunflowers are now dried up and dead. Yeah, it turns out that little flower they saw might have just been a fluke, because there is nothing in this environment that the sunflowers can make to grow, and as a result, they die pretty much overnight. Which, when Peridot sees this, causes her to just explode because at this point she just talked about how this place is clearly fucked and that nothing they could ever do could have brought it back. It was doomed from the start. They just need to give up. Once things are broken, they cannot be fixed. So you know what? Just fuck it, just fuck it all. Okay, she doesn't use all those words. This is a kid's show, for crying out loud. My point is this: she does not care about any of this, and she just starts lashing out that ultimately that everything is just broken, can never be fixed again, and that they have to just accept it whether they like it or not. Of course, Steven and Amethyst point to the flower they saw the other day, and they show that sometimes things can be mended, but Peridot, in her anger, just says, this flower's just like us. It just can't get on with can't catch up with the program, and as in anger, she stomps it, which does cause her to suddenly break out of her mood as she realizes what she did, only for the ground to start shaking and something to pop out of the ground where the flower was. Yeah, it wasn't actually a flower. It was really a gem monster. And the flower was just the one bit of it that was sticking out of the ground. And the gem monster itself looks like a giant turnip. Yeah, it's weird. Point is that when Lapis sees it, or when Peridot sees it, she's like, oh, of course, that's what it was, before the gem monster eats her. As such, Steven and Amethyst immediately go on the offensive as they try fighting this thing, while Amethyst manages, and basically its whole shtick is that it can burrow underground and pop up anywhere it wants. Thankfully, Amethyst is able to get her whip around one of its legs, so she goes underground with it and holds it in place, and Steven ends up jumping in after it, and so to try and take it down quickly, Steven and Amethyst fuse into smoky quartz and just, well, stomp on it and poof it, which frees Peridot and Well, gives the fused gem, the gem monster's gem, which would then bubble back to the temple, which leaves just Smokey and Peridot in the kindergarten, with Peridot immediately saying, I have to go to the bathroom." From there, the episode then cuts back to the train car as Steve and Amethyst are unfused again, and pretty much just Peridot's just sulking about it all and talking about how really, yeah, they couldn't fix anything. The whole thing is screwed, and they couldn't get anything back, and she was clearly using this as a distraction, and so on and so forth. However, as the trio are still lamenting the failed garden, Amethyst finally does take better notice at the countryside, and yeah, it's pretty as they see like grows upon grows of sunflowers, and Peridot finally decides to take a look at it, and even she admits, yeah, it does look really pretty. And yeah, although she still misses her little patch of land, but Steven admits, yeah, Steven just kind of tells Peridot, yeah, well, yeah, that the kindergarten may have been a bust, but there's still plenty of other Earth. There's plenty of other good places, and she can literally plant anywhere else. She can build essentially something new. And yes, it's clear this is an analogy for building up a new life. And pretty much, Stephen and Amethyst just kind of put pressure on her and she decides, okay, fine, she'll try it again. She'll try it again, and she thanks Stephen and Amethyst for doing it, which earns her a group hug, which she eventually reciprocates. It's adorable, and I like it, so. Alright, so my thoughts on these episodes. First, Raising the Barn. This one is kind of a depressing episode, to put it nicely. And it's a nice little departure from kind of what you would expect of this formula, as it really gives us some very realistic character interactions, especially considering the setting and the characters. In the case of Peridot, what I like here is that we kind of see more of how Peridot's character development goes, as it's clear that while she has become a better person than what we've known of her when she was one of the bad guys, it's clear that she hasn't really grasped the whole connections ideal, especially since part of that is that well, she doesn't really understand that relationships are very much give and take. And in the case of her and Lapis, she kind of, as she mentioned, she bends over backwards to make Lapis happy. Now, it's not to say that she and Lapis don't get along. Like, Lapis is not a toxic personality by trade. She genuinely, because Lapis tries her best in many regards, and she and Peridot do get along. And as we showcased in previous episodes, Lapis is kind of like the force that evens out Peridot. Peridot is extremely caught up in her own world, in her own ADHD world. Lapis is the more down to earth one, the more calm one, the one that keeps everything focused. But by that same token, there's also the flip side to everything. As Lapis tends to be the more emotional one of the duo, as she thinks more with her heart than her head, which in a way is not bad. It's just that the emotions in her heart aren't the typical love thy neighbor emotions. They're the you fucked up emotions. I'm gonna screw you type of emotions. And we kind of see that showcased in this episode, as when confronted with the idea of the diamonds coming to Earth, Lapis just wants to run. And despite Peridot advocating for them staying on Earth and wanting to fight for the lives they build, Lapis just doesn't listen. She decides that she has to run. She lets her fears get the better of her, and despite the fact that it's clear that she wants Peridot to go with her, well, she can't. Well, it's ultimately Peridot's decision, and she can't force it. She wants Peridot to be there. She clearly does. The last shot, with the last shot we saw of her in Raising the Barn, when she looked back sad, you could tell there was a part of her that wished that she could go back, or that Peridot could come up with her. But ultimately, her own fears won out, and any kind of connection she had built, she just cut right there. It's again tragic. And on the Peridot side of things, we see some more character development from her. Like, I'm kind of going back to how Lapis and Peridot kind of even each other out. In the case of Lapis, since Lapis is the more emotional one, Peridot tends to be the more logical one. They both essentially, where one falters, the other picks up the slack. Hold on one second. Sorry, Chinny wanted to leave the room. But yeah, like I said, where one falters, the other picks up the slack. As I mentioned, with Peridot and her ADHD brain, Lapis is the one that can typically bring her down to earth and calm her down. But then likewise, when Lapis tends to get more emotional and starts acting on said emotions without really thinking anything through, Lapis is the one, or Peridot has to be the one to kind of calm her down. And when in a case of, and the thing with Peridot is, how she does this tends to kind of be unhealthy for, well, her. Now, to be fair, and ultimately, her final. Now, again, I'm just gonna say this right now. I think whatever Peridot would have said, their relationship would have been doomed from the start because Lapis was not going to listen. As I said, because of her PTSD regarding the Gem War, she wants to just not be caught in the middle of this. So odds are she was probably going to run away no matter what Peridot said. But ultimately, what Peridot said needed to be said. It may not have been what Lapis would have wanted to hear, but it's what had to be said. Because if Peridot continued bending over backwards to make Lapis happy, then ultimately the one that would be hurt most is Peridot herself. Because she'd be giving up everything that she had built and everything she wanted to keep for the sake of someone else. And I understand that mindset, especially when it comes to the whole term of self-sacrifice. When it comes to being a hero, so to speak, it requires you tend to sacrifice that which you want to hold, that which makes you happy sometimes. And when it comes to trying to bend over backwards to make others happy, you tend to ultimately kind of put yourself last on the list. And we see that kind of reflected with Peridot here, as while she doesn't want to go with Lapis, she's perfectly willing to if it means that Lapis is happy. But the problem lies in the fact that it doesn't make Peridot happy. As she said, she and Lapis built a life on Earth, and she doesn't want to run away from that. And she thinks that the best way to confront the oncoming danger is to not run away from it, but to fight it, to defend what they have, to try and protect what they built. And ultimately, it's her finally coming to that conclusion and telling Lapis just straight up, I don't think we should leave. That kind of does some good character development, because it is good development. Because ultimately, it's not always good to be a people pleaser. It's not. If you're a people pleaser, like I said, you tend to put yourself at the bottom of the list, and you're the one that tends to suffer. And the more you tend to suffer, the worse your mental state can get. You can start beating yourself up. You can start resenting other people. You start hating yourself because you think you're being selfish. And we even see that kind of reflected in Peridot in the episode, as she tries to keep trying to find the silver lining on things and starts getting angrier and angrier when people aren't going with the program. And ultimately she's the one that almost thinks that she's the asshole because she even wants to stay on Earth, because it's against what Lapis wants to do. But ultimately, she had to say something because, like Peridot said, God damn it, I still keep getting their names mixed up. Despite what Lapis wants, Peridot cannot just please her all the time. And again, what Peridot said needed to be said, because if it just went on, eventually it would have just kept growing and becoming more healthy. And while in the case of Lapis, part of the reason she wanted Peridot to go with her is because she wanted to have her cake and eat it too, run away from the danger while still kind of sort of keeping the life she built. But the fact that she couldn't is also kind of what feeds more into her character development, which we'll get to when we look at later episodes. But my point is this: it sometimes will hurt to be a people pleaser, but actually, scratch that. It's not always good to be a people pleaser. I think that's kind of the big lesson here, and that's the lesson that Peridot had to learn. And yes, sometimes when you're not trying to constantly make everyone happy, you'll feel like shit, because when you aren't trying to make everybody feel happy, you feel like that you're failing. And in many cases, it can come back to bite you in the ass. Because despite Peridot just bearing her soul to Lapis, Lapis still just fucks right off. And so ultimately, Peridot is left with nothing. And that's kind of the tragedy of it. There is a good arc to the episode, as we see Peridot just constantly struggling to either convince Lapis to stay on Earth or find some silver lining in all this. But ultimately, while she did learn her lesson and was honest with Lapis, at the end of the day, sometimes even having that revelation does not mean that everything will work out. As we saw with Lapis, as she still took the barn and left, leaving Peridot behind to just kind of wallow in her depression. It's honestly sad, and the way the episode ends with just Steven and Peridot and Pumpkin just sitting in the bathroom with Steven on his phone, realizing Connie hasn't gotten back to him, and Peridot just kind of moaning and groaning. It feels very somber as we see this pair kind of mourning their own losses. It's sad. It's sad and just kind of dour, and I genuinely think it works because I genuinely do think that sometimes you need to recognize that not everything has a happy ending, because we do have those hurdles in life and they can be hard. Trust me, I know that. But ultimately, these are hurdles we will need to eventually overcome. And sadly, Peridot and Steven have to kind of overcome those hurdles sooner rather than later. So, again, overall, I think it's a good episode. Has great character stuff, realistic interactions, some good tension and drama. It actually does teach a good lesson about people pleasing and knowing where your limits are. And the ending, I think, is dour and realistic, and does kind of help paint one of those hard lessons that sadly life does need to be that sometimes might need to be taught sometimes. So I dig it. I like it. And as for Back to the Kindergarten, this one's a nice little uplift. It's kind of like the uplifting episode. It still carries with it the kind of the dour tone that we saw at the end of the previous episode, but in this case, it kind of has to deal with moving on. The central theme of the episode is that there are going to be. It kind of follows up with the how sometimes things are not going to work out for you. As we saw, like I said, one of the main resolutions for raising the barn was that sometimes even if you do the right thing, it won't always work out. And so we kind of see that kind of carried over with Peridot as she laments that Lapis is gone and so is her home. But in that same regard, we see Peridot just desperately trying to find some semblance that things can eventually be repaired. Like when she went to the kindergarten and tried planting a garden there, hoping beyond hope that the garden could blossom back up in a place where everything was desolate and dead. Because if that worked out, then maybe there's a chance that Lapis could come back. They could get back everything that they had before. Everything would be good now. They would have their home again. They'd be friends again. It would be all nice and dandy. But sadly, the reality is that sometimes things can't be fixed. There are going to be times when you break something so bad that it's not going to be mended. There are going to be times when you have relationships that you treasure, but that just stop. And whether you want to rebuild them or not, they're just done. And it'll hurt. It will hurt more than you can know. But that doesn't mean that you can give up. And we see that kind of showcase with Peridot in the episode. It's definitely a more in-your-face lesson, but I think it's a good one because ultimately, despite the fact that the kindergarten didn't work out, there's still many other places that she could, well, farm. And as the episode goes along, Peridot kind of talk as the episode goes along, that talk actually becomes an allegory for what Peridot is going through. That yeah, what she had with Lapis may be over, but that doesn't mean she has to just stop dead in her tracks and try and try and regain something that might not come back. There's still many things that she can do. And yeah, the pain is still going to be there. The scars aren't just going to fade, but you can still make something greater over somewhere else. There's still plenty more Earth. There's still plenty more Earth, as Steven said. Regardless of what Peridot is going through, she still has there's still hope in that regard. She can still make something new. She can still build a life, and it's again, it's nice and uplifting. Clear that she's it's nice to see kind of things start rising up to give a little hope in those things. And I like stories like that. Stories that showcase that yeah, things can be dour, but if you have a little hope and apply enough elbow grease, things will get better. And I like that. And it's especially showcased when Peridot realizes that she isn't alone in this. She still has her friends. Steven and Amethyst throughout the episode are constantly acting as her backup, trying to help her overcome her emotional hurdle, help get her back to herself. And by the end, when they start kind of improving her mood and give her a hug, we see Peridot starting to kind of get better in that regard. While they're hugging her, she just lightly hugs them. It's a nice little subtle way of showcasing that she truly is treasuring having them around in this time. And I dig it. It's nice. We do get some again, and on top of that, the rest of the episode has some good kind of humor to it. Especially has some good humor here and there, like when Peridot unintentionally getting delivered that burn to Amethyst and the Amethyst. And while Peridot's depression is definitely kind of sad, there is kind of I do find a little bit of humor in the way they drew her depressed. But it's like. I find that funny, but it also does have that's still very strong in the emotional regard as we see Peridot slowly kind of getting out of her funk. Still kind of resting in it and kind of growing comfortable with it, but little by little seeing her get back into a healthier mindset. It's honestly really sweet and nice, and and by the end, while it's clear she's not 100% back to normal, there's still hope that she will continue rising back up, if not by herself, then with her friends by her side. It's it's sweet, it's nice and kind, and overall, it's just a wholesome episode. So yeah, overall, Raising the Barn, I think had some good realistic character interaction, some good character drama and character growth for them for Peridot and Lapis. It created a good sense of drama, and it ultimately ended in a kind of very in a realistic way with Lapis kind of saying no, I'm not doing this and leaving, which I think is a nice way of showcasing that sometimes things don't always work out the way you want them to. But then likewise, Raising the Barn is a nice way of kind of counteracting that, as it shows that yes, while things may not always go the way you want. Sorry. It always is nice that there is still hope around the corner, and even if something doesn't work out in one place, you can still build something new over something else. And yeah, it may not always it may not always make you feel completely better, but at the very least, it can help you kind of slowly get back there. And overall, it's a nice episode and wholesome, and also still some good action with the whole brief thing with the gem monster. But both of these are good episodes. Really do carry with it. Have some good moral lessons, both are positive and negative emotions. Overall, they're both enjoyable, and I think are good ways of continuing the story from here and showcasing more of the consequences from the previous story arc. So, yeah, I think that's really all I have to say. Thank you for watching. I'm Samuel Johnson, and tune in next week as we finally bring the story arc to a close and see how Steven and Connie finally manage to mend their bridges. So till then, I hope you have a good night, and as always, take care.